Hey everybody, Beansy back with another vermicomposting video. Today we're going to actually build a new bed for our worms. I've cleaned out my bins, the one bin that I've decided to keep and hold for my colony. Put the compost in the woods and the worms as well left over, but I do have some that are over here in this bucket that have been in here for about a week and some fresh bedding, and we're going to make a new bed and put those guys in there and get them started. So I want to show you my bin setup first. It's a double bucket system where all along the bottom on the edges here, and then also in addition on the bottom over in here on the lower ridges, not on the high ones, on these lower ridges, there are holes, drain holes to go into the bottom bucket to catch the leachate, because you want to keep your moisture away from your colony, because that's what causes it to get acidic and then turn sour. So we're going to start with our basic components that I've been working with. I usually, my bins are usually mostly peat moss, but I have very little peat moss left. Yay! And what I do have, I'm actually going to save for my carnivorous plants. So we're going to be using mostly cocoa coir today, which is in this bucket right here. It's been rehydrated because it comes in, let me show you here. It comes in a dry brick. I get these at PetSmart. Excuse me. There's 3 bricks in a package. This is just your basic Eco Earth. I believe it's in the reptile section. But you get 3 bricks in here for about $7. And I'm actually going to cut right now to rehydrating it to show you what it looks like rehydrated. So here we go. So on that last little bit, what you saw me adding was actually the leftover dry peat moss that I wanted to add in it. And what I did was I went ahead and I mixed it in with the coir. So that's already blended over there. And we're going to start mixing our things. We're going to put it directly into our bucket because this is our bed. This is our bedding. This is our habitat and our environment for our worms. They're going to go all through it, top, bottom, all through, and everything like that. So we're going to start actually by putting in some dry matter into the bottom, and I always like to start with a little bit of hay. I'm going to park that in there with them. Now you can do this a couple different ways. Lost my scissors. It comes pretty fine already because it's packaged for guinea pigs, so you can kind of see the sizes that it is right there. But if you still need smaller, you can come in with your kitchen scissors and chop it up if you want to help the process a little bit, make it small, but I don't need to. So I'm going to put that in there like that, mix it around a little bit. Then we're going to put a whole bunch of our cocoa coir in there. And I'm going to layer this a little bit. Normally I just put them all in one ingredient and then I mix it, but I kind of want to be a little faster for the sake of video making. So we're going to actually layer it a little bit. So we've got some cocoa coir in there. I'm now going to add a bit of Dolomite, powdered Dolomite lime that you get at the Lowe's. I keep this in this little container here. It does have a hole on top of it because I was using it for something else. So in order to prevent the powder from coming out, I put a piece of plastic over the top of it. And I got a spoon in here, so we're going to get some of that, or a spork. We're going to sprinkle that in there. And what that is it's a preemptive measure for any super wetness or sourness that may want to show up, because I do live in a very, very humid area. So we're going to put that there. And then we're going to pull out our pre-composted steer manure and put a couple handfuls of that in there. Now you got to be really careful when you're using manure. Fresh manure is not usually very good because it's what's called hot manure when it's fresh. And that's because it is hot. It is hot temperature wise to the touch. When it starts composting, its composting method, and starts breaking down, it emits a great deal of heat. And that heat can not only get trapped in the bin, but it can hurt and harm your worms. So you got to make sure it's what's called cool manure. And that's manure that has sat, any kind of manure that has sat for at least a month or two. And I say that loosely because it'll really depend on your own observations and literally checking the temperature, whether it's with your hand or with a temperature gauge or anything like that, as to whether or not it's actually consistently cool enough, because it will have hot pockets. So if you think it's cooled down, just make sure so you don't burn your little dudes. But they do like all kinds of manure. So now we're going to get, where's that little cut? There it is. Now we're going to put in some sand. And this is just basic play sand. I'm going to put probably about half a bowl in. And that is actually, whoa, almost dropped it. It's about half full, that bowl. And this will actually do us for the entirety of the bin, the whole thing. I won't need to add any more sand after this. In fact, I'm going to dump just a little bit out. There we go. So now we're down to about, can you see that? About that much in the bowl. And that'll be enough for the whole bin. We won't need to add any more. So now we're going to move on to one of our next cellulose-based products, and that is the wood. Now, I normally don't like to put wood chips in, like actual lawn decoration wood chips. One thing, because a lot of times they come dyed, and as I've stated before, I don't really like to give my worms a whole bunch of dye. But they're also really big. They're really, really big chunks, and they take a really, really long time to break down. And sometimes when you have large pieces of wood in there, not only will it take a long time to break down and you have to sift it over and over and over because everything else around it is breaking down so fast, but it also can encourage other pest critters to come in and want to help break that wood down. We call them pest critters because we don't want them, but they're designed to do what they're showing up in your bin to do if you have a lot of wood. So this is open and kind of full, so I'm just going to kind of lean this over. These are my pine wood shavings. That it comes out in kind of big clumps, so I'm going to pull a bunch out, and then I'll break it up once it's in the bin. And this is, when you're making your bed up, this is where you're putting in, if you're going to be putting papers in, this is probably when you're going to want to do it. However, there are different methods of worm binning, and one of them is laying a bunch of shredded paper on top, which I know, Supergirl, you had mentioned that's what you do. And if you don't want to mix your paper into the bedding, that's fine. You can go ahead and leave it on top, but when you're ready to mix it, go ahead and pull that paper off and then give your bin a good mix and then lay it back on top. Because a lot of people do cover their bins with either wood chips like this, or moistened newspaper, or shredded paper, as long as it's wet and doesn't want to hurt their little bodies. So let's put that back over there. I'm going to reach in here and break that up a little bit. Now, we need a considerable amount more hay and cocoa coir in here. And I'll bowl again. There it is. So we're going to go ahead and scoop in a bunch more coco coir. And don't forget, we also have to put our bucket that our worms are in here as well. We're going to put that in like that. And let's give it one more. And then I'm going to chuck a bunch more hay in there. You want lots of hay because there's a lot of nutrition in here. And you know that old adage, you are what you eat. And the kind of bacteria, whatever you want your bacteria eating is, you know, good stuff, because the bacteria in the bacteria waste is what your worms are going to be eating. So it's kind of a you are what you eat by extension. Guilt by association, maybe. So we've got a good amount of hay in there right now. Okay, and I'm going to top that off with another dose of manure and Dolomite lime, and then we're going to give it a good mix. So let's put 1, 2, and 3 good handfuls of composted manure in there. Now you can use steer manure, goat manure, chicken manure. Worms don't like their own manure, and that's because it's so high in nitrogen that it's just too rich for them. It makes them very sick, and you can see your colony decrease in size if they're left in their own castings for too long. Cat poop, human poop, dog poop, they don't particularly care for. And to be perfectly honest, I think that has a great deal to do with the diets that those animals take in. So maybe their waste just isn't as healthy for them. So this is dry. We're going to give it a little bit of a tossing. It's going to be a little dusty. I don't know if that's going to show up. But we want to give this a good mix. We want to mix it all in. We want to mix it all in because they're going to be going through all of this. And it's dry right now. The coco coir is got some moisture in it, but it's not wet at all. And we're going to add some more. So we're going to do that now because this is just falling apart. And what I use is a gallon jug. I very rarely buy milk this size, but I did this one time and I was like, woo woo, the jug, I want the jug. And what I did was I drilled a bunch of holes in the top because my watering can, the cats kept playing in it and it just couldn't hold that much. So I grabbed this, drilled some holes in top, and it's my watering can. So I'm going to do that. Now I know one of the things someone mentioned was not being in the habit of remembering to dechlorinate your water, your tap water. Now, depending on where you are, you could have, okay, that's going too slow, so I'm just going to take this out, dump it in. Depending on where you are, will depends on how much things like fluoride, chlorine, and chloramines are in your tap water. And a good way to dechlorinate your water is to actually just, you know, put some in a pitcher or something and leave it on your counter overnight. Or, you know, something like this. You could even use with the quart size and, you know, tuck it in the garage or in your pantry or by the wastebasket or the dog food or whatever. And if it, especially if it has holes in it like the top, the chlorine and the chloramine and all those things can actually gas off and come out, escape the lid. If you're going to do something like this and you put a lid on it, you at the very least want to make sure the lid is, you know, fairly loose on there so the gas can actually escape. Otherwise, you're kind of defeating gassing off your water. It's not difficult for me because I keep aquariums, so I always have a 5-gallon bucket full of water that's already been gassed off. But one thing that you can do if you are concerned about the water and you keep forgetting until you get in the habit of gassing off water for yourself is you can actually, in any of your pet stores or Walmart, you can actually get this stuff. What this is it's a water conditioner. This is just one kind I think that Walmart sells. But it's a water conditioner. It's called AquaSafe. And you add it to your tap water. Your tap water comes out of your tap directly. You put some drops in this. Of course, read the directions, how many drops for how much water you're using. And that makes it instantly safe. Yeah, it has other benefits in an aquarium. And I'm wondering if it actually doesn't for them as well because their bodies are very similar to the invertebrates I keep by way of snails. So if you're concerned about your water, this costs, I think, like $2.50 or $3. So it's pretty cheap and it goes a long way. It just takes a couple drops in a gallon and it's good to go. It removes the chlorine and the chloramine out of the water. So it's nice and safe. So we're going to Give this a good mix. It needs a great deal more water, actually. It's pretty dry in there. So let's get our water and dump this in there. We're going to dump it all in there. There we go. Might have to tap into the aquarium water, actually. I hope my face isn't in the way. That would be awful. So, okay, we're going to, you know what? I'm going to lift this up real quick so I can get down at the bottom because I don't want to block the view. I'm going to tip this up. Let's do it that way. Maybe you guys can kind of see in there a little bit what I'm doing. And you know, it looks like your basic bedding that you kind of saw that we were mixing through before. It's just, you know, dirt and, I say dirt, but it's coco coir, which in my previous video I had said, I was so excited, I said that it was pulverized coconut shells. And it's not, excuse me, pulverized coconut shells. It's pulverized coconut husks. So it's that hairy stuff that's on the outside of a coconut. And you've got to be careful that you don't, like I'm sure you've seen the coconut husk planter baskets are usually in hanging baskets. Yes, that is the same item, the same ingredient. However, those baskets are made with a whole bunch of glue to keep them in that shape like that. So you don't really want to use that in your bin. I mean, at some point, I imagine they would probably, you know, break it down or whatever, but you don't want to give them that much glue. That's not cool. Okay, we're getting some good mixing in here, but you can see it's all mixed up because they're going to go through all of this. They're going to eat all. This is what's going to be turned into the compost, which is their poo. Worm poo. Worm poo. Who would have thought that poo would have been magic? Magic garden poo. Yeah, it is. All right, so that's a pretty good mix there, guys. So we're going to slide that down back in there. Excuse me. And we're going to actually sprinkle just a little bit of Dolomite lime on top in between their layers. And I wanted to tell you about this is powdered Dolomite lime. As I've said, it's very, 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 very fine powder. I don't know if you can kind of see. Oof, can you see the fluff of the cloud? How fine it is. It's very, very fine. So you don't want to breathe this in. You don't want to foof it around. That's kind of why I keep it covered, is I've got animals. So, they walk around the house with me. But you need to be careful that you can get what's called garden lime in your garden department. And that is not the same thing. For one thing, it's in a crystal form, and it takes too long for it to do its thing and to break down. And this is much more beneficial for them, much safer for them. The other stuff can be really toxic if you end up putting too much, which is easy to do when you're dealing with crystal granules. So, okay, we're going to add a little bit of these guys. I got their charcoal here. Can you guys see that? Okay, you can see in the bin. Okay. Now, one of the things we were talking about was summer's coming and keeping your bin cool. That's going to be a big deal if you live any place kind of warm. I don't, not anymore. But one of the things you can do, I'm just going to start tossing these guys in, is obviously you're going to need some vent holes. You obviously need vent holes because these guys need air to breathe like every other living thing. But in order to keep outside pests from getting in, what you can do is you can do a few different things, actually. Around your vent holes that they're breathing in, you can use netting, like the kind, where'd my lid go? This stuff here that's on the lid, as I've told you before, this is window screening with caulking that's been put on the holes. Now these holes are pretty big, so a lot of the outdoor pests, those little teeny tiny guys, could get through this no problem. But an alternative of what you could do, to cover your vent holes, so A, your worms aren't escaping, and B, outside critters aren't getting into your bin, is instead of this window screening, what you could use is something like a piece of handkerchief or neckerchief, or what are these things called? Bandana. Or a sheet or fabric or cheesecloth or any number of cloth fabrics that has a fairly tight weave, but is not so tight that air can't get through. And a good test to do that is literally cover your mouth with it, your nose and your mouth, and get a couple good puffs through it and feel how easy and the kind of resistance you're getting with airflow of your own breathing. So if you're struggling, then that means air's not going to get through that weave easily. It might have to work, and if there's no breeze, it might not work well enough for your animals. But if you find that your breath is going through pretty easily, like a single layer, even a double layer of bandana does, then you can put that over the top and prevent, like I've got here. Let me show you here. Like I've got done here to one of my springtail colonies. I've got big, massive air holes drilled in there for them. If you know what a springtail is, you know they're itty bitty 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 little critters. And 500 could probably come out of that hole simultaneously. That's how small they are. But I want them to have adequate airflow, and I don't want to disturb them every single day if I don't have to, popping the lid to make sure that they get oxygen in there. So I just use a neckerchief, and I put it under the lid. It's a screw top lid. There you go. And air gets through that no problem. They've been like this for over a week, and I've opened it a couple times, but they're not dying is my point. And that's how easy it is. And you could get, if you don't have a kind of lid that you can make a top like this, like I said, cut little pieces off, and use, if you don't have a dollar store, you can get some cheap caulking at. You could even use Elmer's glue. Or even a clear lacquer nail polish. Just make sure that it's completely sealed around the hole, because if there's any kind of break in that glue substance that you're using, a critter can not only get underneath there and then get into your bin anyways, but then those little worms who like to crawl on the roof can also get out, which, it's going to happen at some point. So let's add some more of these guys. So yeah, adequate ventilation, that'll help keep them cool. Another thing you can do to help keep them cool is put them in your garage if you have one. A nice cool corner of the garage. If you don't have a garage, you could even do something like the water bucket or a juice bucket, water bottles. Fill them halfway with water and then freeze them. And you can either lean them up against your bin, actually lay them inside the bin. Just make sure that they're not leaking once they start defrosting, because you don't want an overabundance of water in your bin, obviously. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. And that's because that's one way that your bin will get sour. You can put a frozen bottle in front of or behind a fan to keep the air cooled around. So there's lots of ways that you can actually keep your worms cool in the summertime that isn't really that expensive. This bedding that these guys are in is actually pretty fresh, so I don't have a lot of broken down stuff or moisture in here, but they're all in the bottom. Ew, I just hit them. Ew, they're so gross. Worms are so gross. I love them. Can you see them? Okay. Ew, I don't want to hurt them. And no, it's not like I'm going to be all marching for worm rights or anything like that. It's just, it's a frame of mind that once you begin to mistreat or think you can mistreat a smaller, lesser life form, that becomes a bad attitude, and it can get really contagious. And then you can think you can mistreat bigger things, and before you know it, we're mistreating each other and we're hurting each other. So if you ever hear me say I don't want to hurt them inadvertently, that's why. It's because it's just mind training. Look at that piece of biochar. There's just all kind of worms in there. I wish I could find a baby or a cocoon for you off the bat, but I can't, so we're going to put that in there. We're going to get these guys out. Yay! Look at them. And they're probably really hungry. I gave them a little food, like a little tiny bit of food, when I put them in this bucket last week. but they ate that quite a while ago. So they're probably pretty hungry. They'll be happy to get in this new bin and not only have more space to run around, but I'm going to feed them also. Look at that. Well, they'll be happy. A nice fresh bin. Now, this is the part, I think, where most people who use a shredded paper or a newspaper or a cardboard method, this would be when you put it on, is that you leave it on top kind of like a lid. And that's fine too, but just understand that that paper, they're breaking that down too. And if it's just sitting on top, not only is it going to keep drying out and you have to keep getting it moist, which means you have to keep dumping water into your bin, which means if you haven't figured out how to get it moist without dumping water into your bin, could also mean that you're putting too much water into your bin. So a good way, particularly if you have shredded paper, it's a really good idea to actually mix it up into the substrate if you're going to be using it. A lot of people that use shredded paper, that is the bulk and the majority of their bedding, which is fine. Just don't overwater it, because then you end up with a big clumpy, soppy, goopy, wadded paper mess, and that's just kind of a nightmare to mess around with. So, all right, it looks like we've got all of our little dudes out of here. Yay. Okay, let's get their char over here real quick. Let's put that in the cup so we don't lose it. We'll put it up on the terrarium. Take a peek. They all look good. I've probably got left less than a pound for sure. I got rid of a great deal of my worms because I'd like to regrow it, because I only want to keep the one bin for now still. So that looks good. And you can see the chips that were in there from last time. So what I'm going to do to make sure that there's lots of moisture, not lots, but enough. We got it wet in there, but not super wet. I was kind of counting on this extra stuff that they were in to be a little wetter than it actually is, to get them, to get that stuff done in there wet. But, you know, I don't want to mess with my aquarium bucket with these dirty, wormy gloves. So we're going to use actually some distilled water. And we'll use this instead of our dechlorinated tap water. There we go. We'll give it a good watering. That probably feels awful on their little bodies. There we go. So we're going to get that nice and wet on top and let it go down and get the rest of that hay and wood chips in there that's nice and dry, a little wetter. And that's going to be about it, I think. Yeah. I'm looking at my notes here, things I kind of wanted to talk about. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it. Okay, that feels pretty wet. That feels pretty wet. So I'm gonna let this set for probably 2 or 3 days. Whoops. Oh. And good. And in 2 or 3 days, this is actually going to settle down probably a good inch, inch and a half, and then I will come out and give it a good mix, and then mix this top stuff up that they've been in for the last week in with that new stuff that we just put in, and give it a good mix up like that. And then that is probably when I will put a layer of moist wood chips on top, and then start my observations of their eating habits and what they're needing and what they're needing to do, and the kind of temperature that they're going to be rocking. So yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. Have fun. Happy wrangling, happy warming, and we'll see you on the next video.